Hi class, I hope that you're each doing well. Welcome to our very last instructional video in this course and the end of our last module. To me, it seems only fitting that we end this class with positive psychology. So much of what we focused on in this class and what is focused on in psychology are the negative experiences that we have in life and how these experiences affect us. We also tend to see a focus on our biological predispositions that lead to those traits and disorders that aren't adaptive. And we spend less time focusing on the predispositions that we have to possess the qualities that encourage us to reach our potential, to flourish, and to have a sense of well-being, and to savor the moments of life that often so quickly pass us by, but that could have been meaningful and enriching experiences. For many decades, the focus in psychology has gradually shifted away from pathology and towards a positive psychology, but we still have a long ways to go. Let's begin by thinking about moods. Moods are global, pervasive responses to experiences. They last quite a long time in contrast to emotions that are more transient. And we know that moods can have a significant effect on our behavior. For example, I don't need to tell you that people help more when they're in a good mood. We ask our parents, for example, to use their car, and we ask our boss for a raise when we think that they're in a positive mood rather than a negative one. Positive moods have been shown to increase many types of helping behavior, including things like contributing to charity, donating blood, and helping coworkers. It's also relatively easy to put people in a good mood. You might not be surprised to hear that people are more likely to help after they've done well on a test or just received a big bonus in their paycheck. But research has found that even more trivial things like finding a coin on the sidewalk or listening to a comedy recording, or even just having someone smile at you or smelling a scent of perfume, a pleasant scent, that these can be enough to put people in a good mood and to cause them to be helpful. For me, as I reflect on your chapter on positive psychology, I think about how we can take the concepts that you're learning and apply them to important issues. So today, as I think about social isolation and a lot of the disconnect that many of us are experiencing, I think that most of us would agree that connecting with others and helping others may help to alleviate some of the stress that we're experiencing. But it's hard to do that in this type of environment. But fortunately, we're beginning to see some changes taking place. So I've focused here as I've looked at positive moods, I've thought about how can positive moods have an effect on helping behavior. And what I'm sharing with you is some of the research that I found in doing some searches in the Northeast State Online Journal article database. So when we think about positive moods, why do you think it might make us helpful? Well, there are probably several reasons. And for one, a positive mood indicates that the environment isn't dangerous and therefore we can safely help others. Second, we like other people more when we're in good moods, and that may lead us to help them. And then finally, and maybe most important for us, is the possibility that helping makes us feel good about ourselves. And this is probably more so true in an individualistic society than we would see in a collectivistic society. And what this does is this then motivates us to want to maintain that positive mood and to find opportunities to help others so that we can then maintain that mood. So it becomes a cycle. So people who are in good moods are actually likely to help when the help that they're going to give seems likely to maintain that positive mood. And what's really interesting is if those same people think that the helping is going to spoil their good mood, even good people, or even people in good moods, I should say, are likely to refuse the help. So we seem motivated to maintain that positive mood, and that can have an effect on whether we're going to help another person or not. So in addition, positive moods, and as you read in your textbook, they can also promote creative solutions. So for example, there was an interesting study where participants watched a funny film and they were better able to solve the candle task that I'll show you on the next slide. And positive moods are also linked with increased thinking speed. And I'll show you that image as well, so you can see how positive moods have an effect on how quickly we're able to solve problems. This is a candle task that you may have seen in an introductory psychology class. It's known as the Dunker candle task, and it's used for demonstrating creativity. And in this task, problem solvers are given a candle, a book of matches, and a box of tacks. And they're then told to attach the candle to the wall in such a way that the wax won't drip onto the tabletop. And the correct solution is tacking the box to the wall so that it can serve as a base to hold the candle with no dripping onto the table. And this is shown on the right. And so what researchers have found is that when people are in a positive mood, that they're better able to solve this problem. And as we reflect on thinking speed, here we see a bar graph showing you how positive moods were reported among participants who had faster thinking and generated more ideas in the allotted time. So we see benefits with positive moods that are specifically related to cognition. We see increases in problem solving, potentially creativity, as we saw with that Dunker candle task. And then we also see here that positive moods seem to have an effect on thinking speed, or at least there's a relationship between those two. So positive moods can have some pretty important effects, but so too can negative emotions. So the idea is that if helping can reduce negative feelings that we're experiencing, then we may help in order to get rid of those bad feelings. So one emotion that most of us would agree is particularly negative is guilt. And when we feel guilty, we think that we may have caused harm to another person, and it's usually someone that is important to us, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be someone that we have recently met. And this experience of guilt increases our desire to create positive relationships with other people. And since we hate to feel guilty, we'll go out of our way to reduce any feelings of guilt that we might be experiencing. And of course, one way to relieve our guilt is by helping. So put simply, feelings of guilt lead us to try to make up for our transgressions in any way possible, including helping other people. So I came across an interesting study that I wanted to share with you. And this was a study that was done in the 1970s by a researcher named Dennis Reagan. And in his study, students were led to believe that they'd broken another person's camera. And this made them feel guilty. And then another person presented as having a need for help. And just as predicted, the students who were feeling guilty were more likely to help the person than those who were not feeling guilty. So the participants who unintentionally harmed another person, they ended up being more helpful to another person who had nothing to do with the original source of guilt. So somehow helping this other person made them feel better, and they were motivated to get this particular study shows us that the function of guilt, that we feel guilty when we think we've harmed our relationships with others, even if those relationships are very new and not very significant. We feel guilty, and the guilt reminds us that we need to work to repair those transgressions. Think about advertisers. So I don't think it's any coincidence that advertisers will sometimes try to invoke guilt to get people to contribute to charitable causes. And this is particularly effective when people feel that they're able to engage in the necessary helping. I'm sure most of us can think about those advertisements that have made us feel guilty. The ones that come to mind for me are the ones that are for helping animals. The one where Sarah McLachlan is singing that song. I can't remember the name of the song, but I just have to hear it and I'm immediately brought to that feeling of guilt, those bad feelings that I have, that sadness that I have for those animals. And then I think about other organizations like St. Jude, and these are all organizations that are doing very good things, and they're trying to get people to donate because they have such an important mission. And when they do this, they're going to be very selective in the way that they try to get people to give money because they only have so much airtime and they really have that need. Of course, this can be used in a very manipulative way in a negative sense as well, where someone might get you to try to do something by making you feel guilty for something you shouldn't feel guilty for, in which maybe they're trying to get you to help them in a way that is only benefiting them and really isn't for the good of anyone else but themselves. There's a concept that you might come across in the future, in future courses that you take in psychology, and it's called the Macbeth effect. And this is the observation that people will tend to want to cleanse themselves when they feel that they violated their own ethical standards. So if people are actually given the opportunity to basically wash their hands or even watch someone else wash their hands, this reduces the amount of guilt that they experience, along with the amount of pro-social behavior that they end up engaging in. And by the way, pro-social behavior is positive social behavior, where you're doing good things for other people. So when you've done something bad, you want to get, especially if it's violating your ethical standards, you want to get rid of that guilt, and you're motivated to engage in pro-social behavior. But even watching other people do that can be very helpful in reducing some of our guilt. And I tend to wonder if this is connected to our mirror neurons, the tendency for us as we watch other people engage in behaviors that we feel that sense of connection, that we feel perhaps what they might be feeling. So I wonder if that might be what's going on when we are watching other people do good things after we feel guilty, and then we feel relief from our guilt. So overall, we could say that the amount of guilt that we have appears to be an important determinant in our helping behavior. In your textbook, you read about a researcher named Barbara Fredrickson who developed a broaden and build theory or model of positive emotions. And she did this to explain how positive emotions benefit us. And so her theory suggests that positive emotions serve to broaden our momentary thoughts and actions. And then this contributes to things like good health and our overall functioning. So she suggests that positive emotions lead us to engage in non-specific actions. So nothing specific, but behaviors that overall are adaptive. And so this might include things like helping other people when we're happy. And perhaps as we think about this as well, we can think about cognitive benefits as well and how cognitive processes can be broadened. And as your textbook points out, you see this in children who become imaginative when they feel joy. So for me, when I think about this and how cognitive processes can be affected by positive emotions, it really leads me to think about the importance of creating positive learning environments where kids feel safe, they feel secure. Not only are they feeling those basic needs of safety and security, though, they're also, in addition to those, they're feeling happiness. They're feeling a sense of contentment. And that's what's going to promote imagination. And we know that that's going to foster cognitive growth and development. So through this lens, positive emotions leave us free to be creative and playful, curious and experimental. And then from those behaviors and feelings flow opportunities to gain new physical, social, and intellectual resources. This is important for both children and adults. As I think about children and that experience of joy, not only is this helpful in promoting imagination, it's also important in facilitating play. We know that play develops critical thinking skills and competencies. It helps children to develop their social emotional skills, their physical skills when they're playing in a rough and tumble way. It also helps them to develop their cognitive skills when they play with objects and with other people. So having joy, having positive emotions that facilitate play is so important in learning. And then also, positive emotions reliably lead us to want to acquire new knowledge. And then that emotion that we might experience of love, which is another positive emotion, this then helps us to develop social resources. And these benefits are not only immediate. These benefits may affect us long after we have experienced those positive emotions. What's interesting, though, is that there appear to be fewer positive emotions than there are negative ones in human beings. For every positive emotion, there are 3 or 4 negative emotions. And this is when you look at specific emotional expressions and feelings. So positive emotions also seem to be less differentiated in their expression. So think about emotions that are negative, like anger and sadness and disgust. Each of these create very unique changes in our facial expressions. But joy and contentment and relaxation, they provide very similar expressions, like having a little bit of a raised lip that we see with a smile. I think we not only see this as we think about emotional expressions, but even as we try to recall emotional memories. So let's just for a moment try recalling 1 or 2 positive interactions that you've recently had with a friend. And as you do this, try to identify the emotions that came up or that were caused by that interaction. Chances are, if it's a positive interaction, you might describe them as enjoyable, maybe fun, relaxing, or maybe all 3 of these. So now think about a couple of negative interactions that you've had with a friend and try to describe these in emotional terms. Now, I think what's interesting is I bet that you'll probably find that the words that you choose to describe those interactions will be quite specific to the situation. So that's different from recalling positive interactions. So let's say you got into an argument with a friend who maybe shared a secret of yours. Maybe you felt betrayed or you felt hurt. But you wouldn't feel this way if you were visiting a friend in the hospital. Instead, you'd probably feel concerned. Yet these situations both elicited negative emotions. So they're very different though, unlike those positive emotions where there's so much overlap and similarity. So I wanted to share this with you because I wanted to give you a little bit of a background perspective to help you think about why we have these different experiences with emotion, these experiences that are different when it comes to positive and negative emotions or moods. So it's speculated that the reason for the differentiation among negative emotions, where we can easily see the difference, comes down to survival and natural selection. So opportunities to feel positive, they generally start to boost our well-being temporarily. And if we don't respond to that, that's not a big deal. But if we don't respond to threats, that could be a very big deal. Or if we don't respond to a possible disconnection from others, that could be a big deal. So it makes sense that we would be so attuned to the differences between these different negative emotions, whereas we don't have as much awareness of the differences between different positive emotions. So as we go back to thinking about Fredrickson and her theory, when we ask ourselves, what good are positive emotions? Positive emotions broaden our thought action abilities. They help us to build resources that serve us now and potentially down the line. So what do you think? Do you think that we tend to focus more on negative emotions than positive ones? Do you think this is mediated by culture? That certain cultures may find that there is a greater tendency to focus on negative emotions more often than positive ones, or vice versa? And do you think the tendency for negative emotions to be tied to negative outcomes might explain why psychology itself has tended to focus on negative emotions? I mean, think about this. Negative emotions tend to create problems for individuals and for society. So maybe this is part of the reason that researchers focus on them. So for example, people who can't contain their anger, they might be more prone to acts of violence. And chronic experiences, as you learned earlier in this course, of negative emotions, these can lead to physical ailments like heart disease, which of course can place a burden on our healthcare system. And chronic experiences of sadness may lead to suicide. So it's beneficial, perhaps, as a field for us to be focusing on negative emotions. I mean, really, there's not much of a link in contrast as we contrast negative emotions and negative experiences. There is not much of a link between positive emotions and negative outcomes. Maybe one exception would be the experience of mania or euphoria in someone who has bipolar disorder. But for the most part, positive emotions don't tend to lead to negative outcomes. But I think what we're going to be finding as we see the growth in positive psychology, and I think that probably many of you already are thinking about, is that positive emotions may play a very important role in guarding us against negative psychological and physical well-being. This is a chart taken from your textbook, and here you see the broadening effects of positive emotions compared to neutral or negative emotions. So experiencing an emotional state of joy or contentment actually led research participants to list a greater number of activities that they might like to engage in at that moment than did individuals experiencing neutral or negative emotional states. Here shortly, I'm going to share with you why this is particularly relevant and how we can use this knowledge to benefit our own growth, and especially to help us when we're experiencing negative emotions, to overcome those negative feelings. So Fredrickson theorized that negative emotions narrow what she called our thought action repertoires, and positive emotions broaden the same repertoire. So what this means is that positive emotions should undo the lingering effects of negative emotions by facilitating this broadening process. And so Fredrickson wanted to know if this was true. Is this something that we would actually see? And so she designed an experiment where participants were required to prepare a speech in just a minute, and then they were told that their speech would be recorded and then presented to their peers. So naturally, of course, there was time pressure, and this created some heart symptoms. And these heart symptoms were comparable to what we might see when someone feels anxiety. And this included having an elevated heart rate and an increase in blood pressure. So Fredrickson and her colleagues, they measured the blood pressure and heart rate of the participants after they were told they were going to have to give this speech, that they only were going to have 1 minute to prepare. And so after preparing the speech, the participants were randomly assigned to view films that were to elicit emotions of either joy, contentment, or sadness. So there were 3 groups. So we have, and then there was also 1 neutral group. So there was 3 experimental groups and 1 control group. So one was going to watch a film that was supposed to elicit joy, one was supposed to elicit contentment, and one was supposed to elicit sadness. And then the other was neutral. That would serve as a baseline. And so what was interesting is that in these experiments, what they found is that the people who viewed the films that were supposed to elicit the positive emotions, that they exhibited quicker cardiovascular recovery. So in other words, their heart rate went down and their blood pressure went down faster than people in the negative and baseline conditions. So those who watched a sad film or just a neutral film afterwards. And so what this suggests is that this is support for this undoing hypothesis. So what can you do with this knowledge then? So as I think about ourselves and how we can take this to improve our own sense of well-being, think about when you have experienced a negative mood or when you've been feeling anxious. We do have a tendency when we're experiencing anxiety or when we're feeling a negative mood, maybe even some of the anger, sadness, that our thinking becomes more narrow and we're not as capable of having broad thought processes, just like you see here with this broaden and build that Fredrickson said that we experience with positive emotions. So we have this tendency with negative emotions to be more narrow in our thinking. So what if we're proactive? What if instead of waiting until we feel sad or waiting until we feel anxious. What if before we do, that we have a plan in mind so that when we do feel that way, we don't have to think through what we're going to do to make ourselves feel better. Maybe we already have it in mind, since we know that if we were to wait, we might not come up with much of anything. And so we might want to, before we feel anxious, before we feel sad, have a plan in mind. It could be watching a joyful movie, or it could be spending time with friends that are very positive, or calling a friend who's positive, or going on a walk through your favorite park. Whatever it is, having that plan in mind can help you. And that's what is supported by this undoing hypothesis. So planning to do this ahead of time can make it easier for you to shift your negative emotions, since often when we're experiencing negative emotions, it can be more challenging to come up with new ideas to relieve these feelings. So planning ahead is going to be helpful. And all of this is in line with what Fredrickson found with this broaden and build theory and with the undoing hypothesis. So how can we apply what you're learning about the value of positive emotions to situations outside of your own personal development? What about in work? Most of you, I know based on talking with you or reading your discussions, most of you work. It might be full-time or part-time, and I know that some of you are in management positions, and you may, if you're not, you may be in a management position sometime in the near future. Well, you can use what you're learning about creating positive emotions in the workplace. So creating opportunities for connection is a great place to start. This is not only because as human beings, we want to connect to other people, but it's also because when we do this, when opportunities are created, this can lead employees to not only look forward to coming to work, but to see work as a positive place where they feel recognized and experience connection. And this is then going to foster positive emotions, which we know has numerous positive benefits, including creativity, imagination, better problem solving, and those are just a few. And of course, helping behavior. So lots of great benefits by doing this. Another thing that can be done is regardless of whether you are a manager or you are not, being a person in the workplace who recognizes other people and recognizes things that they're doing well, recognizing hard work or positive outcomes, this produces positive emotions that can compound and lead to something greater. It produces positive emotions in you and in other people. So, for example, telling someone that they've done a good job, this is going to instill the positive emotion of pride. And then this can fuel subsequent thoughts about what that person can accomplish next, which then can lead to some future desirable behaviors. I know for myself, as I think about this, I think about my sons who play soccer. And I think about how important it is on a team for teammates to say positive things to one another and to recognize the strengths that each other has. When teammates do this, whether it be in the workplace or on a sports team, you're going to see more positive emotions. And when this happens, you're going to see much better performance. And then I also wanted to add is that we also tend to remember not just, we tend to remember emotions more than we tend to remember judgments that we have. And so what this means is that if we think about where many of you might work, you may work with customers, and customers are more likely to remember moments when they felt positive emotions and when they felt emotionally engaged, when they're interacting with that place of business, like a restaurant or any retail store, or perhaps a healthcare facility, wherever it might be. And when these emotional experiences are positive, then they are likely to experience feelings of gratitude. And then this may lead them to repay by remaining loyal to that business. So an important way or an effective way that businesses can engage or can secure loyalty is that they can find ways to engage a customer's positive emotions through human connection. Years ago, I remember Earth Fare. I live in Johnson City, and Earth Fare was a very community-oriented grocery store for quite some time. And then it changed a lot, and it became much more corporate. And I can remember how different that was for me as a shopper and my family. And I remember when they were much more community oriented, how my husband and I, we felt such a greater sense of loyalty to the store. There was this connection that we had with the people who worked there. I still see many of those people, and we have lots of great conversations. I felt this connection then, and I still do with those people now. But some of those people left when it became more corporate. It seemed that they weren't as connected to their employees as they had been. And eventually, as some of you know, Earth Fare ended up going bankrupt and it closed. Now, fortunately, it reopened, and it reopened with the original business owner and some other investors. And they're really doing a very good job of finding that human connection with between both the people who work there and the people in the community. And I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it definitely feels different. And I can see that it can increase loyalty. Think about your own experiences. When you have experienced that connection, you have those positive feelings, which then promotes loyalty. So what we're looking at here so far are what we would call positive subjective experiences. And another important one is what we call flow. So have you ever been in what you might call the zone? And so when we're in the zone, or what we could call flow, we're less self-aware. We lose track of time. We concentrate deeply. We focus all our energies and our attention on skills that we're working on or on challenges that we are engaging in. And this is a very popular area of research, and researchers are looking at how flow affects us in things like sports, art, gaming, learning, and just everyday athletics. So I know for myself, as I think about flow, I think about how important it can be in a learning environment. I think also about my kids who do like to play video games, and I notice sometimes they get in the zone, and I wonder what it is that brings them in that zone. And then I think too about sports. Like I mentioned, my kids play soccer, but they also play tennis. And I can see that when kids are in the zone, or my husband, he played soccer and tennis in college. And when I think about when he was really at his best, we met in college, I think about when he was in the zone where nothing seemed to be really getting his attention outside of the game. He was very deeply involved in that game. It's almost as though for him, probably, that time stood still. So how can we experience flow? How do we experience it? Nearly everyone can experience flow. Both young people, old people, all of us can experience it. So have you ever watched a child playing a new sport? Maybe they're just sort of not paying attention to the game, and then suddenly they get control of the ball and they're just in the zone and they score. Or think of a time when you were focused on an activity that you liked. It probably took 15 to 20 minutes or so for you to get into your zone, but once you did, what happened? What was that feeling like? Or maybe you've been reading a story or immersed in your favorite video game. Some of you might play video games. And did you lose track of time? Did reading that story seem to cause you to forget that it was way past the time that you normally go to sleep? Were you able to reach higher and higher levels more rapidly if you were playing a video game? So these are all examples of the feelings that we might have when we're experiencing flow. And the researcher's name that you see here, that's difficult to pronounce, this is Csikszentmihalyi, and he's the most known researcher associated with flow. And he says that based on his research, about 20% of people in American and European samples say that they've experienced flow several times a day, but that about 15% have never reported this experience. People who experience flow often, like that 20%, they tend to be able to ignore irrelevant stimuli in their environments. And they tend to enjoy themselves in many different situations because of their ability to filter. They also have a lot of control over their thoughts. and they can pay close attention to details, which helps them to identify opportunities to act, to set goals, and to get some sort of feedback and go after even bigger challenges. As we continue to look at positive subjective experiences, another one, and probably one of the most popular and potentially life-changing topics within the field of positive psychology, is mindfulness. So what is mindfulness? Well, mindfulness is maintaining a moment-by-moment awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, our bodily sensations, and our surrounding environment, and doing so through a very gentle and what we might call nurturing lens. So what this requires is it requires us to be non-judgmental, and it requires us to accept. And when I say non-judgmental and accept, I'm talking about of our thoughts, of ourselves, our thoughts and our feelings, so that we can acknowledge our feelings, but not judge them. Like, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I shouldn't be thinking that, or that's a bad thought to have. These are not thoughts that are aligned with practicing mindfulness. Some of you may have heard the term mindfulness-based meditation. And this is a little bit different from mindfulness because mindfulness-based meditation is actually a specific act where you are actually meditating. So you're sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed and you're engaged in a practice of meditation for a period of time. But mindfulness doesn't have to be something that you do in that particular moment or for that 10 minutes or however long you do it. This is a general attempt to really incorporate more mindfulness into our lives. So this is not something that we separate from our everyday occurrences in life. It's something that we try to integrate throughout as many moments of our life as we can. So I wanted to give you a few different strategies that you can use to be more mindful. And I want to do this before I share with you many of the benefits of mindfulness. So mindfulness, above all, is about being aware and awake rather than operating at an unconscious level. So you're aware of what you're doing. But what you're doing is you are aware of your moment-to-moment experience. You're aware of what's going on around you and within you. So you're consciously present in what you're doing while you're doing it. And you are managing your mental and emotional state. So let's say that you're in class and you're taking notes. When you're mindful, you're giving your full attention to that. And then each time that your mind wanders, perhaps to thinking about your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or what you're planning on doing later, it's important if you want to be mindful to just acknowledge the thoughts and then bring your attention back to taking notes, to that task at hand. Now, this might sound like it's a simple thing to do, but it actually can be a bit difficult and it requires quite a bit of practice. But if we make a clear decision that this is what we're going to do each day or each class, then we can begin to develop this pattern of behavior, of being mindful. We can also do things like being a single tasker rather than a multitasker. Some of you might be multitaskers. We kind of live in a multitask world. So single tasking, what we're doing is we're doing one thing at a time. So instead of doing many things or two or more things where we're switching between tasks, we are focusing on one thing. And nobody really is great at multitasking. You're much better at doing one thing at a time than many things at once. And when I say much better, I mean that the outcome of that task is much better if you do it one at a time than if you were to divert your cognitive resources. So it's really much better to single task. But if you do this, when you're single tasking, you're much better able to be in that moment and to think about what you're doing instead of thinking about what's next. And being mindful is about being in that moment. And again, this can require some retraining because Often we're used to living in this way, but it can be very beneficial, as we'll look at. Setting mindful reminders can be very helpful. So this might be having an alarm on your phone, maybe something that vibrates so that you're not disturbing other people. And then every time that your phone vibrates, take a deep breath. I know I have a mindfulness app, and this is very helpful because it will remind me that I need to take deep breaths. And that sounds like a very obvious thing that we should each be doing, but doing this can be so helpful and calming. And often we're not doing this as often as we need to. As a matter of fact, there was an interesting study that was done at Harvard University, and what they found was that 47% of a person's day can be spent in lost thoughts. And they also found that daydreaming can have a negative impact on well-being. And if you're also on autopilot where you're just going through the motions, you miss opportunities and choices that are around you. So when we are in that moment, when we slow down, we take deep breaths, we notice things going on around us, then we are much more prepared and aware. We're prepared to take advantage of opportunities, and we're much more aware of opportunities because we're slowing down. But having an alarm on our phone or on your watch can be very helpful. I also want to say that we may think that being mindful would not lead to more productivity because it involves slowing down, but actually being mindful can lead to more productive thinking, and mindfulness is something that can help us to listen better, it allows us to reflect more and to make better decisions, which is part of being more productive. So there are just a few things I think, and I think if we remind ourselves of that, that can be very helpful and important. So there are many benefits to mindfulness. Of course, being mindful of our thoughts and emotions can promote well-being. It can improve our working memory. It can act as a buffer against depressive symptoms that are associated with discrimination. Mindfulness can help us to make better use of our strengths. It can help us increase our happiness set point. It can also make us more resilient. And it, believe it or not, can have an effect on the part of our brain that's involved in stress. That's the amygdala. So there are many general benefits to being more mindful. Not only can mindfulness promote a sense of well-being in all of those situations that I've shared and provide so many of those very general benefits, can also improve student learning in the classroom and help young girls overcome gender stereotypes that are related to their mathematics ability. It also can help musicians to play with more musicality, and it can help individuals to regulate their heartbeats. As I think about that, I think about monks and how they're very able to have control over things like their heart rate and their blood pressure. So as you think about being more mindful, just at this moment, pay close attention to your breathing. And after watching this video, or when you're studying or taking a test, or any time during the day, pay close attention to your breathing when you're feeling intense emotions. And notice, really notice what you're sensing in a given moment, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and what you're smelling. Those things that might ordinarily slip by without reaching your conscious awareness. And recognize that your thoughts and emotions are fleeting and that they don't define you. And I think this is important. I think about this as being related to that concept of equanimity, that we are all needing that sense of balance where we don't feel those intense emotions pulling us in either direction. We have a sense of contentment. And that if we can realize that those intense emotions, that they are fleeting, then instead of fighting against them, especially those that are negative, we can just ride the wave, ride the intense emotion. And as we do this, we are being more mindful. It's important too for us to focus on our body sensations. as you are in the shower, focusing on things like the water hitting your skin, or as you're sitting in a chair, the way that your chair is fitting into that chair as you're eating dinner. And finding very small moments of mindfulness throughout the day where you can reset your focus and sense of purpose can be so helpful in promoting each of those benefits that you've learned about. These are from your textbook. These are some qualities that are associated with mindfulness meditation. And people who learn mindfulness meditation, as your textbook suggests, they can expect to derive some benefits from that meditation activity. And as you can see, the qualities that are listed here, they fit very well with the established themes in positive psychology. And I'd encourage you to take a moment and pause the video to look at each of these and think about perhaps, or identify perhaps 2 or 3 that you would like to increase in your own life. Through savoring, we can also increase our sense of happiness. Savoring is an active behavior, and it acknowledges the interaction between ourselves and the environment. And when we do this, we're focusing on the experience of joy in its broadest sense. When we do this, we may be doing so in regards to an external event, in other words, something happening outside of ourselves, or it could be something happening within ourselves, a feeling that we have. So it might not necessarily be tangible. There are 3 main types of savoring. One is savoring the past, and we might think of this also as reminiscing. So, for example, remembering funny moments from school with a friend would be a way for us to savor the past. Savoring the present or savoring the moment is another type of savoring. So, for instance, we might enjoy a new meal by drawing our attention to the flavors and the smells. And then we can also savor the future. We can think of this also as anticipation. So, for example, we could visualize the trip that we've planned with our friend for this upcoming weekend. Each of these events or each of these behaviors can increase our overall sense of well-being. So try doing at least one of these a day and see how this makes you feel. There are 3 levels of savoring. The first is savoring experiences. This refers to the overall experience while we're intentionally focusing our attention on appreciating the positive event. So this includes our sensations, emotions, perceptions, and thoughts and behaviors that are linked to that particular environment where we are immersed. So an example of this level would be sitting at the beach, feeling the ocean breeze while we're watching the sunset. A second level of savoring is the savoring process. And these processes connect a positive event to positive emotions by modulating different positive states. So, for instance, the process of appreciating a kind action from a stranger regarded as beneficial, it regulates gratitude as a positive emotional state. And then we have savoring responses. These are the positive or the specific behaviors that we have that are positive. And these may also be thoughts. So either thoughts or behaviors that emerge as a response to some type of positive event. So these responses regulate the influence of this positive event on our positive feelings by either amplifying them or dampening the intensity of them. So the more that we can think and really reflect on that event or experience in a positive way, the more that we are savoring and the more that we can increase our sense of well-being. There are some preconditions to savoring that will help us to be better at savoring or to have a more intense experience of savoring. One is that we should be able to connect with the present moment. Two, we need to be free from urgent social responsibilities. Sometimes it's really difficult to savor when we have lots of demands going on around us. So finding times in our life throughout the day where we can have a freedom from responsibilities, even if it's just for a few minutes, can increase our ability to savor. And it's so important too that our basic physical and psychological needs are covered. So if we're hungry or if we're not feeling safe, it's going to make it more difficult to savor. So we can think of this on our own individual level so that we've met those needs, and we can think about how by doing so, then we're better able to be present in the moment. But then we can also think about how important it is for us as a society to help others to meet those needs. Because when people don't have those needs met, it directly connects to their ability to enjoy the moments that many of us may take for granted. And then we also need to have a presence of mindfulness and I guess what we could call a meta awareness regarding our positive experiences. So working on mindfulness can help you to be more ready to savor. And there are some factors that affect the intensity of savoring. So the more time that we spend savoring, the better. And then we also have stress reduction. That's going to be important. We want to be able to reduce the stress so that we can have a more connected experience with whatever it is that we are trying to savor. And also, complexity is important. More complex events enhance savoring. There's more richness to them. Think about those events that are very rich that you've experienced, whether it be rich with a variety of people, people that you love and care about, and foods and music, or think about music and different types of music, or the quality of music, the quality of sound, whatever it might be for you. Complexity helps with savoring. And we know that the more that we savor, the greater our sense of well-being. And then we need to have a balance in our self-monitoring. If we're too focused on self-monitoring, this can distort our ability to savor. But if we are not focused at all, then this also can affect our ability to savor. And then finally, when we share with others what we're experiencing, whether it be the process, whether it be something we're reminiscing about, or whether it be something we're thinking about in the future, savoring is enhanced when it's shared with others. There are also individual traits that account for why some people are happier and psychologically healthier than others. And these are traits that each of us can develop so that we can each have a greater sense of happiness and well-being. An important individual trait is hope. Hope is so fundamental to who we are as humans. It helps us remain committed to our goals and motivated to take action towards achieving those goals. It gives us a reason to keep fighting and to keep believing that our circumstances are going to get better, even if things haven't been very predictable in the past. In your textbook, you read about Snyder's hope theory, and he suggests that hopefulness is a life-sustaining human strength that's comprised of related components. One that is suggested that's not cited in your textbook, but one that is important, according to Snyder, is what he calls goals thinking. And this is the clear conceptualization of valuable goals. The more clearly you can establish your goals, the greater your sense of hope. I think about when I talk with students and I'm doing academic advisement. I recognize that sometimes when I'm meeting with students that they may not be calling me or seeking me out to talk about their future goals. They might be, or their long-term goals. They might be more interested in thinking about just what classes they're going to be taking next semester, which is completely understandable. But I really think it's so important, and I emphasize this, I try to if we have the time, I think it's so important for students to be thinking about their longer term goals, to really articulate those. And at first they may be fairly vague, but to at least be having a sense of where they're going. And then the closer they get to figuring that out, the clearer those goals get. And when that happens, there is an increase in hope. Another component, according to Snyder, is what's called agency. And this is the ability to initiate and sustain the motivation for using strategies that we use to achieve our goals. And these are connected to our pathways. So these are the pathways are the capacity to develop specific strategies to reach those goals. They are our realistic roadmaps. When I'm doing academic advisement with a student, we're looking semester by semester, but I'm also talking with them about beyond that next semester and helping them hopefully to think about what they're going to be doing in future semesters as they approach graduation. And hopefully they're developing that sense of agency, that ability to initiate and sustain the motivation for using those strategies. This is an image from your textbook. This is Snyder's Trait Hope Scale. I'd encourage you to take a look at this and to calculate your own hope score. You'll see that there are two subscales, agency and pathways. So you can identify your score for each, and then you can identify areas for improvement. You'll notice that each are connected to the ways that we think and the ways that we behave. And here's a great quote from Charles Snyder. A rainbow is a prism that sends shards of multicolored light in various directions. It lifts our spirits and makes us think of what is possible. Hope is the same, a personal rainbow of the mind. And I think you'll see this as you look at that hope scale. You'll see all of the different elements of the mind that are part of hope. As you'll note from that hope scale, hope is not something that we just either have or don't have. Hope is something that we can develop, and it leads us to experience more positive emotions. There are numerous additional benefits. We know that with its built-in orientation towards the future, it's definitely going to motivate us to maintain our involvement in life, regardless of the limitations that are imposed on us. Hope also has the potential to enhance our sense of well-being over time. There was an interesting research study that I found where researchers discovered that people who were more hopeful and expect to be successful, that those people are more likely to experience a state of well-being, whether or not they succeed in achieving their goals. It's the hope that contributed to their sense of well-being. Hope also leads us to believe that we'll be better able to handle stress better. I found an interesting study that I think is relevant to you all as college students. This was a study that was conducted by Snyder, who again is the leading researcher in hope. And he found that high hope college students were more likely to graduate than their low hope counterparts. And these findings suggested that students who had a low level of hope, that they graduated at an overall rate of 40.27% as compared to high hope students who had a graduation rate of 56.5%. And what they also found was that low hope students were also at a greater risk of being dismissed relative to their high hope peers. So people with hope are also more likely to be flexible thinkers and to have social support. This probably played some role in their success in college. But as you can imagine, this can have a myriad of other benefits as well. Resilience is another important individual trait, and this refers to our ability to cope with whatever life throws at us. Some people are knocked down by challenges, but they return as a stronger person and more steadfast than before. And we call these people resilient. So how can you become more resilient? Your textbook provides some very helpful suggestions. So some key suggestions include trying not to catastrophize when a crisis happens, to not see an event as insurmountable, or to realize and accept that change is a part of life, and to be decisive, but rely on problem and task-focused coping strategies. Also, to develop and maintain a positive view of yourself. Those are just some, and these are not easy. They take work. You have to focus perhaps on one and work on that for a while. Resilience is not something that we develop overnight. One key component to resilience, though, is fostering connections with family, friends, or people in our communities. Sometimes it is the connection with one significant person that can make a big difference in our lives. Grit is another individual trait that we can develop, and this is where we have perseverance and passion for achieving our long-term goals. There's a very well-known researcher named Angela Duckworth, and she's the leading researcher on grit. And she says that what she calls gritty people approach achievement as a marathon. She also says that for people to develop grit, they need to develop what she calls a growth mindset. I would encourage each of you to look more into this concept of a growth mindset. It's very interesting, and it can also have tremendous benefit for you in your own life. In other words, when we think about a growth mindset, this means that the person needs to believe that their basic qualities are things that they can cultivate through their efforts instead of the belief that their qualities are carved in stone. So the experience of growth and fixed mindsets, and as you see here, a fixed mindset is believing your qualities are carved in stone. These experiences are on a continuum. It's not possible to always operate from one or the other. So for example, you might have a fixed or a growth perspective on your math ability. I often hear this with students as they're thinking about taking pre-calculus or prob and stats. Sometimes students will say that they're not good at math. And sometimes they'll say, I'm just not naturally good at this. And so in their minds, they think that they either get math or they don't. Now, this is a fixed mindset. Now, a growth mindset is where the person believes that they have the ability to learn math because it's a skill that a person develops. This person's perspective is that they don't understand it yet. So an individual could also have a fixed mindset in one area of their life and a growth mindset in another. So let's say that you might believe that you're not athletically inclined. So you avoid sports or other activities that are physically demanding. You think that people are born with or born being very athletic or having athletic abilities, that this is a natural talent that you just don't possess. And in another area of your life, maybe you feel confident in your public speaking ability. So you seek out opportunities to do that more often. And you also think that this is a skill that develops with practice. Now, each time that you do it and you receive feedback, you learn how to get better, and this motivates you to keep going. It's very easy to think about how a fixed mindset could hold a person back. In our math ability example, that person might avoid seeking jobs that involve math. And the bottom line here is that some people operate from the perspective that intelligence is a finite thing, and others think that it's mutable. So think about how you can change your way of thinking so that you have more of a growth mindset. Think also about if you ever do have children, or if you currently do, how you can promote a growth mindset in children. How can teachers promote a growth mindset? Here's a great quote. Cultivate the habit of being grateful for every good thing that comes to you and to give thanks continuously. And because all things have contributed to your advancement, you should include all things in your gratitude. Another important personal trait is gratitude. Gratitude is an emotion that's similar to appreciation, and positive psychology research has found neurological reasons why so many people can benefit from this practice of expressing thanks for our lives, even in times of challenge and change. So, to begin with, we need to define what we mean by gratitude. Gratitude entails recognizing and concentrating on the good things in one's life and being thankful for them. And gratitude has many important benefits. Here are a few. It can enhance social connections with others, as you learned from your readings. It's a powerful tool for strengthening interpersonal relationships. And people who express their gratitude for each other tend to be more willing to forgive others and are actually less narcissistic. Giving thanks to those who've helped us strengthens our relationships, and it promotes relationship formation as well as relationship maintenance. It also helps us with connection, and it helps us to have increased feelings of relationship satisfaction. Gratitude can extend and increase positive feelings. In other words, it can increase feelings of happiness. In an interesting study where researchers asked participants to write a letter and deliver that letter to someone for whom they were grateful, what they found was that the happiness levels of the participants and life satisfaction of those participants was dramatically impacted, even weeks later. So gratitude doesn't only have long-lasting effects, it also acts as a positive feedback loop of sorts. So, for example, the more gratitude that we experience and the more we express, then the more situations and people we may find to express gratitude towards. And I have this picture here because it makes me think about gratitude among children. And when children show gratitude to one another, I know I've seen this and I'm sure you have. You've seen the positive effects and how this feedback loop develops. Gratitude can also lead to feelings of content and enjoyment. And gratitude can lead people to have greater feelings of well-being. It can improve optimism. In an interesting research study that examined the effects of gratitude on well-being, researchers found that after 10 weeks, people who focused on gratitude showed more optimism in their lives, including optimism that was related to their health. So think about this. When people are more optimistic about things, like their health or their well-being, then they're probably more likely to act in ways that support a healthy lifestyle. So we can see that gratitude has numerous benefits. In this video, you've learned about the importance of positive subjective experiences. You've learned that positive moods can have an effect on different behaviors and abilities, including our tendency to help others, our creativity, our imagination, and our ability to solve problems. You've also learned about mindfulness, its benefits, and how to cultivate it. You've also learned about the individual qualities that are associated with happiness, including hope, grit, resilience, and gratitude. I'd like to highlight a few key points as you think about the individual qualities that you can cultivate to increase your own happiness. As we think about hope, hope is more than just a state of mind. It's an action-oriented strength. In the absence of this inner resource, how can we find the motivation to pursue our goals and the resilience to pick ourselves up when things go wrong? Many people have the idea that hope is an either-or proposition, believing that in order to have hope, all despair must be extinguished. While it's true, of course, that hope comes and goes, as each of us have noticed in our own lives, there are times when we each feel like all hope is diminished, and we need to remember that there is always light at the end of the tunnel. Through practice, patience, and hope-focused discourse, in other words, hope-focused thinking and conversations with others, we can develop our own hope, and we can help foster the development of hope in others. In this video, you also learned about resilience. As you think about resilience, imagine that you're going to take a raft trip down a river. Along with things like slow water and even some shallow water, Your map shows you that you're going to encounter perhaps some unavoidable rapids and some turns that might be kind of dangerous. How would you make sure that you can safely cross the rough waters and handle any unexpected problems that might come from this challenge? Maybe you're going to enlist the help or support from more experienced rafters as you plan your route. Or maybe you're going to think about relying on a companion, a friend, who might go with you along the way. Maybe you're going to make sure that you pack an extra life jacket, or maybe you want to make sure that you have a very strong raft. So with the right tools and with the right supports, one thing is sure, you'll not only make it through the challenges as you're going down the river, you'll also feel more confident and courageous afterwards because you succeeded. So life may not come with a map, right? We know that life can be difficult, and we know that life can come with unexpected twists and turns. And these can include everyday challenges and things that are more traumatic. And each of these can have a lasting impact, especially those that are very traumatic. Each change affects us differently. And each of these changes, whether it be the death of a loved one, maybe a life-altering accident, or a serious illness, each of those bring a unique flood of thoughts, strong emotions, and feelings of uncertainty. Yet, people generally seem to adapt well over time, and some people seem to adapt better than others. And while these adverse events, much like rough river waters, are certainly painful and difficult, they don't have to determine the outcome of our lives. There are many aspects of our lives that we can control, that we can change, and that we can grow from. And that is what the role of resilience is. So becoming more resilient not only helps us get through difficult circumstances, it empowers us to grow and even improve along the way. So as you read the chapter and watched this video, you learned about different things that you can do to improve or increase your resilience. And as you think about this, think about how we can foster the development of resilience in children, whether it be you go into the field of counseling or child psychology or education, or you're a family member, perhaps an aunt, an uncle, or a parent. So here's what we can do. We can prioritize relationships. It turns out that connecting with empathetic and understanding people can remind us that we're not alone in the midst of difficulties. It's so important for us to focus on finding trustworthy and compassionate people who validate our feelings. And this will support the skill of resilience. Joining a group can be so powerful as well. One-on-one relationships are important, but some people find that being active in groups, whether it be in faith-based communities or local organizations, I know that many students volunteer, for example, at the Boys and Girls Club or other organizations. Each of these provides social support. And just like if we were going down that rapid river or that river with unexpected twists and turns, having that social support of many is going to help us along the way. It's also important as we think about building resilience for us to take care of our bodies, to take care of our health. This idea of self-care that most of us have heard of, it may be a popular buzzword, but it is a legitimate practice for mental health and building resilience. And that's because stress is just as much physical, as you've learned in this course, as it is emotional. Promoting positive lifestyle factors like eating well, getting good sleep, making sure that we get enough exercise, each of these can help strengthen our bodies to adapt to stress and then reduce the toll of emotions like anxiety and depression. We can also practice mindfulness. You learned about mindfulness in this module. Mindfulness can include an act where you spend 10 minutes a day doing something like meditation, meditative mindfulness, or it can be something that you do throughout the day. It can involve a practice that happens frequently throughout the day or all throughout the day. It might be mindful journaling. It might be something like regularly taking deep breaths so that we can recognize the moment that we're in and pay attention to all that we're experiencing. So go back and take a look at mindfulness in your textbook. This is such a beneficial practice in promoting health and well-being and resilience. Another thing that we can do to promote resilience is avoid negative outlets. Sometimes when we're experiencing anxiety or depression, we might feel as though we want to turn to substances. It might be, for example, drinking a glass of wine or drinking a beer. But sometimes this can go too far, as many of us know. And also, when we're doing this, it's like putting a bandage on a wound. So instead, we need to focus on finding resources to manage stress so that we're not seeking just to eliminate the feeling of stress altogether, but that we find the support and healthy coping strategies that will help us. You learned about the benefits of helping others. And so volunteerism can actually promote resilience. We know that in the time of COVID, it can be difficult to find volunteer opportunities and people might feel like it's risky. So you might volunteer online. There are multiple opportunities for you to do meaningful volunteering online. And I'd encourage each of you to look into those. And when we volunteer, we're gaining a greater sense of purpose. We're fostering our sense of self-worth. We're connecting with others. And all of this can help us to grow in resilience. Another thing we can do is be proactive. As we think about being on that dangerous whitewater in the river, think about how important it would be for you to plan ahead. So acknowledging and accepting our emotions is important, but it's also important for us to ask ourselves ahead of time, what can I do about the problem that I might be facing in the future? It's also so important for us to keep things in perspective. How we think, as you know from this course and from your own life, can play a significant part in how we feel and how resilient we are when we're faced with obstacles. Think about setting a goal to try and identify areas of irrational thinking. Maybe there's tendencies that you have to catastrophize difficulties or to assume that if you aren't good at one thing, that it must mean that you're not good at all things, or that people, perhaps if you have one bad experience with them, that you don't have great social skills, but in fact, it's just one experience. So we need to keep things in perspective. And then we also need to maintain hope. It's so important for us to maintain hope, and it can be difficult when life isn't going our way, but optimism is connected to resilience. So think about how we can incorporate each of these in our own lives, and think about how you can foster the development of each in the lives of people that you care about, especially kids, because inevitably they're going to encounter challenges, some more so than others. And resilience is that key factor that can help to promote their success. You also learned about grit. Grit, resilience, and a growth mindset are intertwined. Some people think of these traits as innate, but others, as you learned, like Carol Dweck, believe that they can be developed. And developing them takes time, it takes patience and attention. I'm going to place a scale on our course module that's called the Grit Scale, and it's a great place for you to start if you're wanting to assess your own level of grit. And developing a growth mindset can be a key factor that can help to promote grit. I know that for myself, I try to seek out opportunities to learn more strategies for developing a growth mindset and to remind myself of things I can do each day to foster the development of that in my children. And finally, you learned about gratitude. And gratitude is a human emotion that can be most simply defined as a deep appreciation or acknowledgement of someone's altruistic act. It's a tool we can use for increasing our own well-being, but it's also linked to a desire to build people and societies that are healthy and that are thriving. There are many ways that we can practice gratitude, and I'd encourage you to think of something that you can do in your own life to increase your own feelings of gratitude. You might consider a gratitude journal or writing a letter to someone who you want to share your deep felt appreciation for. I'd like to say that I am very grateful for each one of you, for all that each of you have contributed to our online discussions and the commitment that you show to learning and to your future. It is inspiring to me. I hope that you'll continue to learn about these important concepts in positive psychology and to find some use for them in your own lives. I also hope that you'll connect with me in the future and let me know how I can help you while you're a student or afterwards. I wish each of you the very best in your futures.